You've heard about La Rochelle's Everest-inspired run to the Champions Cup title, the man behind that, and more in the realm of theming in sport. A man described by Ronan O'Gara 3 weeks ago as a key part of the La Rochelle jigsaw is on the line. David Sharkey, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks very much for having me on.
Thanks, Millie, for jumping on. Do you accept congratulations for the La Rochelle win?
Reluctantly. It's nice to be a small part of what is a very exciting story. I think it's appealed to lots of people, lots of neutrals out there in Ireland, the UK, and in France as well. So yeah, it's nice to be a very, very small part of that jigsaw.
Do you get to be part of the La Rochelle staff on the day? Do you get to the games? How does that work out?
So when I go out for visits to Marcel de Flandre, I would go with the team. I'd be part of the entourage going in the midst of a lot of very excited La Rochelle fans with flares and screaming and shouting and wondering who's that strange guy in a blue jacket. The last time I was out there, I managed to wear the colours of Bayonne rather than La Rochelle that weekend. So I think I'm going to have to get a bit more kit if I am to be part of the backroom staff on game day.
Were you down at the Aviva?
I didn't go. No, I made the call early enough not to go. I am La Rochelle's only Leinster fan, and I could do it a year off after the last 3 years. But no, I made the call that on game day in that instance, my job was done, I suppose, throughout the week, through what myself and Raj had sort of set up. So I made the call to stay at home and try and stay calm after 11 minutes, which I just about managed.
It must be a very cool thing to, like, you paint a lovely picture there earlier on with that sort of being part of the backroom team for that thing where you're not there week in, week out. It still holds that novelty almost of it being a very cool thing, I presume, to do on match day.
Absolutely. No, I remember when I went out for pre-season a few years ago, the team was sort of in a circle in a meeting room, and I was observing, so I sat behind, and Raj was very, very clear. No, you're either in the huddle or you're out of the room. So he's very, very keen for me to sort of be in the midst of it. So whenever I've been out, it's been very much so as close as I can. In the warm-up against that game in Bayonne, in April, I was sat on the bench up until about maybe 15-20 minutes before kickoff, chatting to a few of the injured players, trying out my pretty terrible French, and discussing maybe some of the upcoming games and things like that with the group. So yeah, it's great to be, as I said, the novelty still hasn't worn off of being a part of it.
Can we spool back a little bit, Dave, just for the people who are coming to it fresh? I think there'll be plenty of rugby fans that are familiar with your story, but there'll be plenty of people who won't. Just to spool back a little bit, first of all, to talk to us about a little bit about what it is you actually do.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, and it's one I have to explain a lot. And when I try to explain it in French, it usually falls apart. So thankfully, I don't have to try it here today.
It's safe territory here, yeah.
Merci beaucoup. So I've been called lots of things: communications caddy for Raj, a sort of ghostwriter for him. But ultimately, I'm a communications consultant. My company is Team Architecture Limited, and what we do is we specialise in the use of themes and stories to motivate, engage high-performing teams in sport and in business. So, well, what on earth does all of that mean? So ultimately, I support Raj with his key messaging and how he might deliver some of those key messages week to week. So I'll design lots of the pre-match, post-match presentations. I'll design some mindset videos or content, and I'll sort of try and steer him through what it is he's trying to convey through the use of this idea of theming, which I've sort of stumbled into myself over the last number of years.
Was that, am I right to say that was from the famous, I call it famous because I think I've watched it 3 or 4 times, 1014 podcast?
Yes. So I would have been coaching myself. I would have listened into some of the stuff that Raj and Scott Robertson would have spoken about on the 1014 podcast, and that was the first time they'd given any sort of insight. Now, they still didn't give a huge amount, and I sort of took with that and ran with it, and then lo and behold, I'm sort of working with Raj here all these years later. So
you start to implicate that. You were involved in rugby coaching at that time with your team, so you come back to them and you say, I've heard this thing, can we give this a go?
Yeah, so I'd actually been working on a project the year before, which was looking at redefining masculinity. So it was based around the idea of character coaching. So lots of people in sport will talk about selecting on character, but not many people talk about developing character. So that was something that I sort of wanted to look at. So I was exploring that idea the year before. And then when I saw theming, I thought that was actually a better way to connect those ideas together. So I started exploring that, heard the YouTube clip with Raj and the lads from the 1014 and thought, hang on, this might be a way to do that. Started doing it, wrote it up, and then Raj reached out to me to do it for them.
We are lucky enough to have Raj on the show every so often, David, regularly actually, and it strikes me as no surprise that he'd be someone who'd be into the idea of theming and motivating players in that sort of sense. So essentially, theming, for people who are unfamiliar, you're using metaphors and stories to motivate and engage players.
Yeah, so theming maybe has it's far more widespread than people think. People use analogies, metaphors all the time in sport, in life, in business. Theming is just maybe being a bit more deliberate with that and aligning it to what you're doing already. It's not an additional thing. It sits on top of what you're trying to deliver. So it's a new way to engage old messages or to deliver, content in an engaging way that helps players or people to learn, makes it stick, embeds key ideas around language or key concepts that you want people to use moving forward. So it can be very, very effective if it's done well. Don't get me wrong, it's done terribly in lots of environments. And some people I've had to advise going, I think you should probably stop theming, because when it becomes a distraction from what it is you're trying to achieve and trying to do, then stop. It has to align to what it is that you're trying to do. And Raj is someone who's a curious coach. He's fairly innovative in what he's trying to do. He saw the benefits of theming down in the Crusaders. And I think when he saw I was doing it, he was wondering, well, how good's this guy's French? It's not good, but we get by.
How does the whole process come together, David? Like, what's the starting point for that? Like, is it, so you've talked a little bit about your interactions with Ronan, with the players. So what's the foundation blocks for that? Because I did wonder, like, who within the organisation are actually feeding into how that theme is landed on, or how the threads of that fall out then over the course of a season.
So predominantly it's through Raj. It's probably expanding. Now that it's our third season doing this, we're sort of expanding things out into connecting with other players. The more players get to know what it is my role is exactly when I show up in a big blue jacket in the opposition colours and I'm walking in with them, wondering again what it is that I'm doing there. But it is expanding out, but largely it's through Raj. So I tend to work with head coaches or people, again, close to the top of an organisation, if it is, as I said, in business, because ultimately if we can deliver the key messages, as I say, the right messages by the right people at the right time, can be really, really powerful. So I'll tend to work with Raj, but it has to come from him initially. I can then shape it and suggest things. And the better I know him and the environment, or as I like to say, if I know what the temperature is like in the room, I can know how to pitch the message. But when I'm remote via Zoom or WhatsApp and I'm not in the room regularly, I have to work through him to do that. Now, there are other players who will come into that. And as I said, when I do go out there, I try and soak up as much as I can, so I get a best sense of how to deliver some of this content to Raj. Who are the
good you'll only be as giving as you want to be, so treat this question whatever way you want. Who are the best players in that environment, or coaches, or whoever you want in La Rochelle at the minute that are feeding in?
So I suppose, again, for me, it makes a lot of sense where a lot of the English speaking players who have an understanding of theming, and that's something that people often miss. The Crusaders are excellent at theming because they've been doing it for years. It's part of their culture. When Raj and I started this 3 years ago, it wasn't. So we drew on the likes of, Will Skelton, who would have experienced theming at the Crusaders, Ahea West, who left La Rochelle last year. He would have explored theming in New Zealand. Tawera Carbarlo, Victor Vito, these kinds of guys. So I would have certainly sat down with them a lot and kind of discussed maybe the certain angles. But you're looking for the dynamic in the group in some cases. I certainly did try to speak French with Greg Aldrit until I realised, someone told me later, he speaks pretty good English after about 15 or 20 minutes of me trying to speak to him. But the better I get at French, the more I'll be able to connect to those players.
It's one of those, I even think it's such a new and modern initiative, and it's brilliant as well, but like even Ronan probably looks at it now theming as something that he could have utilised through his own playing career. Like I even think of the 09 Grand Slam team, even up to that stage probably theming wasn't a thing that was massively used or utilised.
I'd probably say it was used in a sort of in a smaller sense. It was maybe used short term, and people tend to do that. They tend to jump between different themes and stories. Whereas I suppose what we're trying to do is, yes, you can have a theme or a story, but it doesn't have to be the same story. What's the message you're trying to convey? The famous one that Rog and I started with was Les Premiers, which was the firsts, because he wanted La Rochelle to win something for the first time because they never won anything. So we found a way to thread that story of first. Every type of way you could dice a first, and I suppose that's why he reached out to me, who's a qualified English teacher who looks at stories in lots of different ways, and is able to maybe do that with it. But I think it's far more prevalent than people think. When I give presentations, and I'm giving one tonight to the Australian Institute of Sport at about midnight, so it's a long day for me, but you know, when I present to people like them, they'll turn around and go, oh, we've actually been doing something like this previously. You know, I recognise lots of this. It's just we didn't necessarily call it theming. So, listen, whether people knew it at the time or not, it was probably there. Maybe just not as prevalent as maybe myself and Roger doing it.
When you're talking about first there, Les Premiers, and I'm a big space geek and big into the moon landings. Adrian will know where I'm heading with this. But like you'd have used the first moon landing, for example, as one. I know around the 50th anniversary in 2019 was it of Apollo 11. So like even maybe explain to us how you would use something like that, an historical event, and the stories of Armstrong, Aldrin and Collins as inspiration in a sporting sense.
So the message of Apollo is one that I've used in lots of different ways, and it's such a vast story. Similar to Everest, it's a huge story that there's so many different avenues and angles you could look at it. People tend to use Everest or the Apollo missions as one single story. They said they go to the moon, they got there, well done, and they sort of move on. Whereas I'm sort of thinking, hang on, there's a hell of a lot more in there if you dig through it. So we used Apollo in some senses to look at, well, what was the ambition that was shown to, you know, state the aims by JFK that, you know, they were going to get to the moon before the Russians at a time when it was crazy to think that they were going to beat the Russians. They were so far behind them. And then you explore maybe the dynamics of the Russians themselves, like who was Yuri Gagarin, you know, how was the cosmonaut program so far ahead of them? How did they catch up? And then you start to look at, well, La Rochelle a few years ago certainly were not the top dogs of Europe. They were not the top dogs of the top 14. And so who are you trying to catch up to? You know, who do you need to maybe push and state those kinds of aims? And there's lots of stuff obviously with the actual landing itself. You know, the dynamics of the crew, of when you dig into the personalities and the people there, and the invisible astronaut of Michael Collins is one that resonates with lots of people. You start to be able to align this to the group or the challenges that you're facing. So for me, theming where it's most successful is a way of seeing a situation. It is a mindset, it is a perspective, and when you see it in the same way, as I said, there's that alignment, and it really resonates with the group, and it becomes something that no one else is doing. So much of high performance environments, so professional sport, is repetitive, is our presentation after presentation is boring, sat in a room. This is different, and it's as I said, it's old messages in a new way that can bring it to life.
Seeing as we're dipping into our pet loves here, your Westmeads involvement was a one and done, or what was the crack with that?
Yeah, so being a proud Westmead man, I was delighted to get the call from Jack Cooney a few years ago to help him. So about 2 years ago, I did some work. It was the season that was still struck by COVID, so the year before the Tailteann Cup success last year. And I would have done some work with him in the background, because while I say I specialise in themes and stories, as a communication consultant, I'll look at the dynamics between, like, how are you interacting with your coaches. I'll do communication systems assessments on the day. I'll think about maybe some of the values and the messages you're delivering anyway. And so I did that with Jack for a year. And then the following year he came back and said, look, how do we expand this into an actual theme? And so sitting down with them and the backroom staff, it was fantastic to kind of find what it is they wanted to do and find a story that they belonged to, which was the story of courage in Katie Taylor, which ended, and I was delighted to be there again on the day. And as lots of my friends from Mullingar would say, geez, if I never thought Westmeads would lift a trophy, and I certainly never thought you'd be on the pitch at the time in Croke Park when it happened. So it was great to be part of. Jack's obviously moved on to a national role, and Desi's taken over that. And Desi would have been someone I would have bounced an awful lot of ideas off when we were delivering the Katie Taylor stuff. But theming mightn't necessarily be for everyone, or it might be for everyone at this stage. He's got a big challenge in front of him, and there's a big match this weekend. Again, I'll be keeping an eye on. So I'm not necessarily working with Westmeads this year, so I'm back to being a fan, which is fine too.
Yeah, get back in there if the success of the other year was anything to do by. Are you still teaching?
Yes, so I'm a part-time English teacher as well, and I'm then also running team architecture as well. So
and is it the dream that starts to consume, David? Is that the ambition?
I think it's becoming a little bit like that. Like my plate is getting fuller and fuller. I'm working with an Aussie rules team at the moment, a team in the Premiership next year. I'm doing some work with the backroom staff of Irish women's hockey for their Olympic qualifications campaign. So I'm getting busier, which is great. I do love teaching. The skills I've learned in teaching help me to support people with their communications and how they present and how they check for understanding and whether messages are really delivered and whether they're really sharp or refined. So maybe I wouldn't run away from teaching just yet, but for the meantime anyway, I've managed to get a bit of balance, which is good.
Is your Premier League team top 6, top half?
Sorry, no, that's
Rugby
the Gallagher
Rugby
Premiership.
Okay.
No. So there's been 1 or 2 international football coaches in touch with me, but nothing's firmed up with that just yet.
It strikes me that your interest in teaching and even history, as you say, David, it ties into it so well. Even other themes that I've read that you've utilised, even Shackleton's escape from the Antarctic, and even the story of Ayrton Senna in Formula One. Like, it must be nice to be able to use, I guess, your interest in history to develop these. You might also touch on totems as well. So totems is something I hadn't been familiar with whatsoever, but the Crusaders would have used, for example, in relation to Muhammad Ali. So maybe tell us what exactly a totem is.
So totem is a physical reminder of the theme. It brings it to life in a subtle way. So, for example, the Crusaders would have given Man of the Match awards when they were running a Muhammad Ali Rumble in the Jungle theme. They would have given boxing gloves as their Man of the Match award, or it might be a belt if someone has accrued a certain amount of Man of the Match awards. For the Ayrton Senna theme, which I ran with the rugby club, which I was coaching at the last few years, we used to give like an Ayrton Senna mug. We had, which was to our man of the match. We also actually gave an Alain Prost mug to the opposition man of the match, who we would pick, because we identified again as much as Senna, for those who've seen the documentary about Senna, that Prost might come across as the bad guy. He actually brought the best out in Senna, and there's lots of times where you could argue that Prost was smarter than Senna in certain cases. So we didn't want to completely diminish or villainize Prost in that way. So we would use physical reminders of that. And Raj touched on some of the totems that they used in the final with the photographs they brought to Dublin in that instance. So totems are just physical reminders of the theme. You're not necessarily delivering the story all of the time, but it's a reminder that the story and the idea is present.
Donnacha Ryan is someone who, has he leaned into it as well? Skin, as Raj would call him.
Yeah, so I was actually there when it was his first week coaching, and he is so hungry to learn. He's a great guy to kind of to corner you and ask you again for feedback. He wants to learn so much, and it was great actually going out there then a couple of months ago and seeing again that difference in how he's come along. So he's very, very interested, I suppose, in what I'm doing. He's still very new in coaching, and I suppose he's learning as he goes, but he's just so eager to soak up so much. He always says to me, he's like, oh no, my French isn't good enough, and I'm sort of looking at him going, French is about 20 times better than mine. So but obviously he's doing it every day, but he's someone who's very, very interested again, I suppose, in what myself and Roger are doing.
He's a class act for sure. That was brilliant. Really enjoyed getting under the skin of what it was all about, David, and we'll be keeping a close eye on your progress, be it the Premiership or the Premier League, and
we'll see.
Hopefully we'll catch up with you again down the line. Thanks a million for jumping on.
No worries. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks a lot, David Sharkey there, who's the man behind all the theming that you've been hearing about so much over the last little while, and it was good to get a bit of an insight as to what it's all about.